Before we start this profound journey, tell us in the comments, from which city are you reading this? And please, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts. Your engagement helps us bring more compelling stories to life. The quiet escape. A diagnosis that freed her. For 5 years, she lived beside a man who never truly heard her. Not when she screamed in silence. Not when she pleaded with her eyes. When the doctor said it was cancer, Eleanor Vance didn't cry. She wanted to tell him, but he was too busy to listen. As always, so she packed her bag, left her wedding ring on the table, and left. If she was going to die, she'd do it in peace, because by his side, she was already dead inside bar. What no one imagined was that her departure marked the beginning of a life she never had the courage to dream of. The kitchen light flickered, an old electrical fault, but no one there cared anymore. In that 3-room flat in London's Clapham district, where the walls still sported the builder's dull beige, a silence had settled, becoming part of the furniture. Eleanor slowly poured her coffee, with a patience she'd learned the hard way. There was no sound beyond the intermittent drip of the hot liquid, no smell beyond her own despair. It was morning, but she wore no hope, only an old dressing gown, her hair haphazardly tied, and a weariness that spilled from her eyes. Outside, neighbors exchanged greetings. Children ran to school. Someone dragged a shopping trolley. Inside, Thomas Reed still slept, or pretended to, or simply ignored that anyone else was there. "Thomas, coffee's ready," she said, without raising her voice, without expecting a reply. No door opened. No footsteps echoed down the hall. No "thank you," no "good morning," nothing. It was always like this, like living with a piece of furniture, like talking to a ghost. She sat at the table and picked up her phone. Messages from work, from her sister, from the clinic where she had tests scheduled for that afternoon. She'd been feeling nauseous for weeks, a diffuse pain in her stomach that grew in silence, like everything else in her life. She was losing weight without trying, and the mirror reflected a woman she no longer recognized. She looked at the ring on her finger, a thin, almost discreet band that 5 years ago had symbolized promises never kept. Thomas Reed was a lawyer, handsome, educated. He knew how to smile at the right parties, praise when convenient, be charming in public. That's why everyone said she was lucky. A husband like that, who wouldn't want him. But no one saw the other side. No one was there when he came home late, said he was solving something important, and locked himself in his study until dawn. No one saw him leave dirty dishes for her to wash after a full day's work. No one heard conversations interrupted with a "we'll talk later," which never came. That morning, she had dreamed of a frozen sea. She was in it, trying to swim, but something dragged her down. Waking up, she understood that sea was her own life, and she was sinking every day beside a man who didn't offer a hand. She grabbed her bag, checked her documents, and left without a sound. The hospital was 20 minutes away, light traffic, gray sky. On the way, she tried to distract herself with music, but every lyric seemed to say more than she wanted to hear. She arrived punctually, filled out forms, handed in the test results. She waited. Alone? Thomas appeared almost an hour later, headphones still dangling from his neck, eyes fixed on his phone. "Did I call you?" he said, without looking up from the screen. "Where are you?" She looked at him without answering. It had always been like this. She giving everything, he offering crumbs. They were called by the doctor, a gray-haired man with an inexpressive face and overly technical words. Eleanor went in first. Thomas, late, stayed at the back of the room. "Mrs. Vance, the results are clear," the doctor began, glancing at the papers. "It's a stomach tumor." already in an advanced stage. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't ask anything. She just fixed her eyes on a random spot on the wall, as if she could escape through there. Thomas was still standing, fiddling with his phone. "Can you repeat that?" she said politely. "It's gastric adenocarcinoma. The treatment is complex. We'll need an urgent biopsy to confirm the degree of invasion. And then we discuss options." She thanked him, stood up. Thomas did too. In the car, the silence was heavier than ever. "Did you hear what he said?" she asked. "I heard," he replied. "But are you sure that's all? Maybe it's just nervous gastritis." She didn't respond. They arrived home in the late afternoon. He went straight to the shower. She to the bedroom. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling for minutes that felt like centuries. She thought of everything she had faced alone. The overdue rent in the early years, the medicines for her sick mother, the muffled cries in the bathroom so as not to disturb him. She thought of the first time she tried to talk about their marriage, and he said she was exaggerating. She thought of the last time she truly laughed. At 8 o'clock that night, he appeared in the living room in a towel, still drying his hair. "I'm back. You didn't call me. What happened?" She got up, looked at him with a frightening calm. "I want a divorce." "Are you joking?" "No, everything is ready. Just needs your signature." He laughed, thinking it was another one of her dramas. "Eleanor, we'll talk later." "This is about the tests, isn't it?" She walked to the dining room table, took off her ring, placed it on the cold wood, and looked at it one last time. "No, this is about the last 5 years." She left with the same bag she had used to go to the hospital. Without tears, without a scene, without questions. She left behind an entire life that was never truly hers. She took a taxi to Euston Station and headed for Edinburgh. Without looking back, a heartbreaking decision, but a vital step towards freedom. Have you ever had to walk away from something that was slowly killing you inside? Share your experiences in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the continuation of Eleanor's journey. The train glided along the rails with the exact slowness of someone in no hurry to arrive. Each passing station was like a piece of skin she shed along the way. Eleanor still didn't know if this was an escape or a liberation, but she knew it was an end. And perhaps that was enough for now. She rested her head against the window pane and closed her eyes. Her reflection didn't lie. Dark circles under her eyes, sharper features, pale lips. She didn't look like someone who had just left a marriage. She looked like someone who had just come out of a war. And in a way, she had. In the months leading up to the diagnosis, what hurt wasn't the disease silently growing inside her. It was the weight of remaining invisible. On Sundays, when the smell of her neighbor's cooking filled the house and the sound of football echoed from the television, she would set the table for two, even knowing he would eat standing, directly from the pot, without saying if it tasted good. She spent hours choosing seasonings, chopping vegetables, trying to remember if he still liked cilantro. Afterwards, she would wash the dishes alone, while he snored on the sofa, hands clasped over his belly, his face as indifferent as a stone. But the worst was his mother. Mrs. Evelyn Reed lived upstairs and made a point of appearing unannounced, with a bag of pastries in hand and a sharp tongue. She never called Eleanor by her name, always her, the girl, that one. She would sit on the sofa as if she owned the house and look around with disdain. "Is that carpet new? Questionable taste, but I suppose it matches you," she would say, smiling as if she had paid a compliment. And Thomas? Silence. Always silence. Never a defending word. Never a, "That's enough, Mum." It was as if he expected Eleanor to learn to shrink on her own. And she did. She shrank into baggy clothes, measured words, postponed dreams. Once, Evelyn asked, with the calculated cruelty of someone who knows where to hurt. And children? Still nothing. Or are you waiting for a miracle? Eleanor clutched her cup too tightly. The porcelain cracked in her hand, but she didn't respond. Thomas just looked at his watch and said he had a meeting. The deepest pain didn't come from the contempt. It came from the absence of reaction, from the abandonment disguised as normality, from being left alone in the room with poisonous words while he pretended the world didn't involve him. And then came the days when she tried to touch him, a gesture, a kiss, a conversation at the end of the night, and he would turn away. Always sideways, as if his body were an unmatchable border. Eleanor spent nights in the bathroom, kneeling in front of the toilet, vomiting what she hadn't even eaten. She didn't know if it was anxiety, gastritis, or her body trying to scream what it could no longer say. In one of those early mornings, sitting on the cold floor, she thought that perhaps she was already dying. And strangely, no one would notice. In therapy, which she attended in secret because he said psychologists were for people who wanted attention, the therapist asked her what she really wanted. And Eleanor remained silent for almost 5 minutes, not because she didn't know, but because she had forgotten what it was like to want something. She wanted to be seen. That's all. She wanted someone to notice when she cut her hair, when she wore the blouse he himself had given her on their first wedding anniversary, when she was sad, tired, or simply wanted to talk. She wanted him to say at least once, "Stay." But he only said, "Deal with that later." Over time, she stopped trying. She stopped telling him about her day. She stopped asking if he wanted more coffee. She even stopped buying flowers, even though she knew he never noticed them. She stopped waiting. What remained was a tired body dragging itself through daily obligations, the electricity bill, the car payment, the end-of-month groceries. She did everything, and he said he trusted her for that. As if she were a secretary, not a wife. As if her silence were a gift. Little by little, Eleanor began to disappear. No one noticed, not even herself. Until one day, going down to collect the mail, she saw a neighbor hugging her husband in the building's lobby. It was a simple, everyday gesture, but there, in that prolonged embrace, was everything that was missing from her life. That hurt more than the tests, more than the humiliation. It was like realizing she had died inside, and only her body kept pretending to be alive. It was that night she began to plan her departure. It wasn't impulsive. It was like a delicate surgery, done in silence, carefully, day after day. She opened an account in her name only. She hid money in envelopes tucked inside books. She sorted documents, asked her sister for help. And when she finally heard from the doctor what she already felt deep in her chest, the diagnosis, she understood there was no more time to postpone the truth. She was dying, literally, and staying there was a choice, a sentence, a cowardice. That's why when she took the train to Edinburgh, she didn't even take her laptop. She left behind the sheets, the coffee maker, the wedding ring. She didn't want memories. She didn't want objects that carried the weight of what she had endured for years. She sat by the window and closed her eyes. The journey would be long, but for the first time in a long time, the destination was hers. Only hers. Eleanor Vance was ceasing to be a shadow, and even without knowing what would come, she was beginning to remember what it was like to exist. This story is a testament to inner strength. What's the bravest decision you've ever made for your own well-being? Share it with us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Eleanor's powerful journey. The Quiet Escape, a diagnosis that freed her Edinburgh Waverley Station exhaled the bittersweet scent of a city that never sleeps. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the rush of those arriving and departing, barely noticing their own footprints. Eleanor stepped off the train with faltering steps, not from indecision, but because her body already showed signs of accumulated fatigue, years of neglect, and the pain that now throbbed stronger than ever. The plan was simple: stay at her sister's for a few days, repeat the tests, sort out the basics of life. But nothing in Eleanor's life had been simple, and this time would be no different. 2 weeks after the change, she could no longer eat. The pills went down her throat like broken glass, and water seemed insufficient to keep her body standing. She woke up in a cold sweat, with persistent nausea and dizziness that made her lose her balance. On the 3rd fall, her sister decided to take her to the hospital. "You need help. This isn't just stress," her sister Sophie said, trying to stay calm as she drove through the city's red lights. "You're too pale. This has gone beyond the limit." Eleanor didn't reply. The pain didn't just come from her stomach, but from a feeling of disintegration, as if her soul was releasing the last knots that kept her here. Upon arriving at the hospital, she could barely walk to reception. Tests confirmed what was already suspected. Her body was collapsing. She was malnourished, dehydrated, with critical levels. She needed to be admitted immediately. When she woke up the next morning, she was connected to tubes, monitors, and IVs. A young doctor with a somber and direct gaze entered the room with an envelope in his hands. He sat by her side, without preamble. "Mrs. Vance, there's something we need to discuss urgently." She nodded, still groggy from the medication. "The tests indicate there's a possibility, small, but real, of surgical intervention. A risky procedure that requires prior stabilization. Your condition is serious, but there's an opportunity." Eleanor looked at him without emotion. Inside, a phrase echoed. "I have nowhere to go back to." "We'll try, doctor, even if it hurts." That same night, her body gave in. Exhaustion overcame lucidity, and she plunged into darkness. The coma came as an unasked-for rest. There were no dreams, no nightmares, just a void that breathed for her. And it was in that limbo that Dr. Ben Carter appeared. A night shift nurse, he had a discreet presence. He wore no perfume, spoke softly, walked without making a sound. He was the kind of professional many patients barely noticed, but who was always there, observing, helping, caring for the details no one sees. On Eleanor's chart, there was an unusual observation, written in her sister's nervous handwriting. "Contact with ex-husband strictly prohibited. Delicate situation. Protect her right to silence." Ben respected it, and he read. He read every line of the reports. He read the medications. He read the features of the pale face of the unconscious woman. There was something about her that disquieted him, not in a romantic sense, not yet, but on an almost existential level. She was between worlds, and he, somehow, felt he had to stay there. While everyone else followed their shifts with usual urgency, Ben created silent rituals around Eleanor's bed. He collected the withered flowers left by no one, changed the sheets before they smelled of hospital, played classical music very softly in the early hours of the morning. Sometimes he read books aloud, old poems, small fragments of letters he had at home. He never asked who she was. He just stayed. In the administrative wing, Eleanor's sister was making difficult decisions, the cruelest of all, announcing her death. It wasn't an irresponsible choice, but a desperate measure. Thomas had tried to make contact, subtly, with worried messages, calls that began with, "I just want to know if she's okay," and ended with, "She owes me explanations." Her sister knew if he discovered Eleanor's current state, he would use it against her, as he always had. So she spread the news. Eleanor had passed away. A brief post, no photo. Just enough to keep the curious away. Just enough to ensure he wouldn't come back. In the hospital, no one knew of this decision. Only Ben, who began to notice the absence of visits. No new flowers, no family. It was as if Eleanor was an orphan of the world. One night, as he wiped the patient's fragile hands with a damp cloth, he asked softly, "Why did they leave you so alone?" He didn't expect an answer, and he didn't get one. But at that instant, he saw her fingers move, a slight tremor, almost imperceptible. He didn't boast. He just noted it in the chart, as if it were a clinical detail. But inside, something ignited. In the following days, the subtle movement returned. An eyelid spasm, an unconscious whisper, a tear that fell from nowhere. "You're trying to come back, aren't you?" he murmured one early morning as he adjusted her pillow. He still didn't know her full name. He still didn't know her story. But he felt she needed to be waited for. And he waited. He waited while his colleagues talked about the patient with no prognosis. He waited while shifts passed, and she remained motionless, as if time couldn't reach her. He even waited when they said it was better to transfer her to a palliative ward. Ben silently refused, because there was something in the way she breathed, an insistent pulse, a life clinging to what remained. And he, without knowing why, decided not to let her sink alone. In that cold room, between monitors and subtle alarms, Eleanor still didn't know it. But she was being protected by someone who didn't want to save her, just didn't want to let her go. And that, for now, was everything. A glimmer of hope emerges from the darkness. What do you think motivated Ben to stay by Eleanor's side when no one else would? Share your thoughts on his quiet dedication in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for the next chapter of Eleanor's astonishing journey. The quiet escape. A diagnosis that freed her. The days out of the ICU had a different scent. Not the metallic, cold smell of sterile equipment, but something more human. A mix of disinfectant and warm soup, of half-open windows and clean sheets. Eleanor's room now had sand-colored curtains, a slow-moving clock, and a plant in a white pot left by a nurse. It wasn't a home, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a battlefield either. She walked slowly. Her legs still trembled, and her arms seemed not to belong to her own body. Food went down with difficulty, but she could taste it now. Time seemed to move more calmly, and Eleanor was learning to listen to her own rhythm. In the first days out of the ICU, she refused visitors. Her sister understood. She said she would be nearby, but would only enter if called. Eleanor thanked her in silence. She needed space, and also time to face the woman she had become. Sometimes, she would sit in front of the mirror and gaze at her own face for a long time. She was thinner, with sunken eyes and thinning hair at her temples. Her hands trembled as she tried to tie her hair back. There was something strange about looking at herself after so long of running away from herself. One rainy morning, she asked for paper and a pen. She wanted to write something. She didn't know what. Perhaps a letter to the old Eleanor. Perhaps a list of what she had survived. But her hands failed her, and the paper remained blank. The only thing she managed to write was a name, almost instinctively. Ben, who now came to the room less frequently, not out of neglect, but out of respect. He was still on the night shift, but he let the morning nurses take over. Still, he left small signs that he had been there. A chocolate hidden in the drawer, a note with a quote from Virginia Woolf, a bookmark between the pages of the biography she had started reading. Eleanor began to anticipate these small gestures. She never said anything, but she knew. She felt it. And that was enough. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the window blinds, she felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't physical pain. It was memory, like a blow from afar, a forgotten memory that suddenly invaded her. She was lying down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, when she heard her mother-in-law's laugh in her head. Infertile and useless on top of that. At least if you were pretty, maybe you'd be good for something. Eleanor closed her eyes tightly. She tried to expel the voice, but it was embedded. That woman never needed to raise her voice to hurt her. The tone, the look, the presence were enough. Always questioning, always criticizing. And Thomas, always absent. Or worse, present, but silent. Complicit. She remembered the times she would sob, locked in the bathroom, until she ran out of breath. She remembered pressing a pillow against her mouth to make no sound, wishing, with absurd force, to disappear. A tear slid from the corner of her eye. She didn't try to dry it. It was just one more among so many. But there was something different about it. It wasn't sadness. It was grief. She was burying the woman she tried to be to please others. The one who tried to fit into Thomas's silence, her mother-in-law's criticism, the mirror of a marriage that never reflected love. When Ben entered that night, he noticed the heavy atmosphere. She wasn't visibly crying, but the room held a weight in the air. "Do you want me to come back later?" he asked, hesitating at the door. Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Stay, but don't say anything today. Just stay." And he stayed. He sat in the armchair by the bed, crossed his arms, and leaned his head back. Time passed slowly, and the silence between them wasn't empty. It was necessary. It was a space where she could break down without needing to explain. The next morning, she woke up with an envelope on the table. It was a simple pencil drawing, an open field, with a woman from behind, in a light dress, looking at a cloudy horizon. In the bottom corner, he had written, "Everything that is cloudy clears up one day. But first, it needs to rain." Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest. In the following days, she began to walk alone through the hospital corridors. She observed people, children with colorful bandages, elderly people telling stories no one listened to, mothers with dark circles under their eyes trying to appear strong. And her, a woman who had survived an absence greater than death, the absence of herself. She began to write. Not letters, but fragments, loose phrases, broken memories, dialogues that never happened. A notebook soon filled with pages scribbled in blue pen. She wrote between meals, after tests, on sleepless nights. On one of those nights, she accidentally left the notebook open on her tray. Ben saw it. He read a highlighted phrase in the center of the page. "I died while still breathing." Coming back to life was relearning to say my name without fear. He didn't comment. He just gently touched the corner of the page and smiled. Then he looked at her, who was watching him in silence. "Do you want to talk?" he asked gently. Eleanor hesitated. Then she nodded. "I do, but I still can't tell it without getting lost in the middle. Then let me listen when you can." She closed her eyes and smiled for the first time in weeks, with her whole face. The scars on her body still burned. The stitches from the surgery itched, and doctors' visits were frequent. But the deeper wounds, the ones that didn't bleed, were beginning to have names. They were beginning to be seen. Ben wasn't a savior. He never tried to be one. He didn't propose quick cures, nor did he offer solutions. He just walked by her side. And that, now, was all Eleanor needed. Eleanor is slowly reclaiming herself. What do you think this journey of self-discovery means for her future? How important is simply being there for someone in pain? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe as Eleanor's path unfolds. The quiet escape. A diagnosis that freed her. Ben wasn't a savior. He never tried to be one. He didn't propose quick cures, nor did he offer solutions. He just walked by her side. And that, now, was all Eleanor needed. But peace, when built on the rubble of the past, never lasts long, without tremors. And the first came in the form of an anonymous call to the hospital. "Hello, I wanted to confirm if patient Eleanor Vance is still admitted." The receptionist, distracted and tired from the afternoon shift, didn't realize there was a red alert in the system for external contacts regarding that patient. She answered without thinking. "She's in rehabilitation. Room 3. It was enough. Thomas Reed had spent the last 2 months immersed in a discreet, silent obsession. Outwardly, he maintained a facade of normalcy, attended the office, kept his social media profile active, and told friends he was dealing with grief as best as possible. But deep down, his mind wouldn't accept it. There was no body, no certificate, just his sister's announcement. Dry, evasive, no wake, no funeral. Something didn't fit, and he knew it. He paid for access to medical databases, hired a private detective in Edinburgh, threatened clinic employees with lawsuits. Little by little, he pieced together loose fragments, admissions, name changes, silence. When he finally located her, he didn't act on impulse. He waited for the right moment. He waited for Eleanor to be alone. The afternoon was suffocating. The hospital, too silent. Ben wasn't on duty. Eleanor had just returned from physical therapy, still panting, her hair tied in a messy ponytail, her hands trembling from the effort. She was sitting in the room's armchair, reading one of the poems Ben used to leave on small cards. When she heard the knock at the door, she suspected nothing. But when the door opened, the air disappeared. There, standing with the same cynical, self-assured expression as always, was Thomas. Time hadn't changed him much. His hair a little shorter, perhaps. A thin, unkempt beard. His shirt open at the collar, as if he were there by chance. But his eyes held the same emptiness as before. The same arrogance disguised as concern. "Hello, Eleanor." She didn't move. Instinctively, she clutched the armchair armrest. "I thought you were dead," he said, as if commenting on the weather. Eleanor didn't reply, but something in her body tensed. That presence, that smell, that tone of voice. Everything triggered memories she had tried to bury. She knew something was wrong. "You're not the type to just disappear," he continued, slowly approaching. "But I understand. You were scared, ashamed. You wanted to start over, and you thought erasing me from your life was the easiest way." "Get out," she said, in a low voice, without looking up. He ignored her. "Do you think you can just disappear like that? That you can replace me with just any nurse and pretend your past doesn't exist? I was your husband, Eleanor." She looked up. For the first time, she looked him directly in the eye. "You were my prison." The answer disarmed him for a second, but he laughed, that short, nervous laugh she knew well. "Are you avoiding me? Do you think you can just erase what we had?" She stood up, her body still weak, but her voice firm, steady, as she had never used it with him. "You lost me before you even noticed I was leaving. Now, even your words can't reach me." They looked at each other for long seconds, and then Ben appeared at the door, without a word, without explanations. Just his presence. He wore his slightly wrinkled uniform, a white coat, and an expression that asked for no permission. "Sir, this room is restricted to family and medical staff," he said, with a calm that bordered on threat. Thomas scrutinized him from head to toe. His eyes gleamed with that toxic shine of unsatisfied possession. "You must be the replacement," he said, with a twisted smile. Ben didn't reply. He took a step forward. "Leave. Now." For an instant, Thomas hesitated, but then he smiled again. That cold, poisonous smile. "This isn't over yet, Eleanor. Do you really think you can erase everything? Life doesn't work like that." Eleanor simply took a deep breath. "My life no longer works the way you want it to." Thomas took a step back. He looked at Ben, then at her. "We'll see." He left. No slammed door, no scene, just a threat suspended in the air. Ben closed the door carefully. He turned to her, concerned. But before he could say anything, Eleanor spoke. "He can't touch me anymore." Ben nodded. He didn't tell her she was safe. He didn't promise protection. He just took her hand firmly. And in that gesture, she knew she was no longer alone. The confrontation. What do you think will be the fallout of Thomas's discovery? Will Eleanor truly be free? Share your predictions in the comments. And remember to like and subscribe for the thrilling conclusion. The quiet escape. A diagnosis that freed her. Ben's presence had become the point of stability Eleanor had never had. He didn't talk all the time, didn't fill silences with cliches, nor did he try to rush her recovery. He just remained, with an attentive gaze, discreet gestures, and a patience she didn't know still existed in the world. But the past insisted on picking at the cracks from where she was trying to be reborn. And this time, it wasn't a memory. It was a live threat. After Thomas's invasion of the hospital, Eleanor slept poorly. Every sound in the hallway made her shoulders tense. She started leaving the light on at night. She asked that the door not be closed completely. Ben noticed, even if she didn't say it. And it was he who brought the news that would change everything. That day, he sat by her bed with an envelope in his hand. He was more serious than usual. "I checked the civil records. I thought you should know something." "Eleanor," he paused, "your marriage to Thomas was never properly registered. There was an error in the civil registry. You both signed, yes, but the document was not validated due to a missing signature from the public official, and no one noticed." He took a deep breath. "Legally, you were never married." The silence that followed was strange. There was no immediate relief, no anger, no shock. It was more as if an invisible piece had fallen, rearranging all the memories of the past. "I was never his wife," Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to Ben. "I was complicit in my own prison. That protects you now, but it could also become an advantage for him if he decides to pursue you for revenge." She looked at him, serious. "What do you mean?" Ben hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to pressure her, but he needed to be honest. If he finds out that the marriage never legally existed, he might see it as an opportunity. He lost control over you, and men like him don't accept losing. Eleanor remained silent for a long time. The weight of it slowly settled on her shoulders, like a submerged stone returning to the surface. "And what do you suggest?" she asked at last. "That you get properly married," Ben said, with the calm he used when dealing with a panicked patient. "To me." She looked at him, surprised. There was no irony, no tension, no charm in his voice. It was a naked proposal. Raw. Real. A civil marriage. Quick. Simple. Legal. If he sees that, perhaps he'll back down. Perhaps he'll finally accept that you no longer belong to him. And if he doesn't accept it, you'll have more support. Legal protection. A new last name joined to yours. A new registered history. Eleanor lay back on the bed. She closed her eyes for a few seconds. She knew it wasn't a romantic proposal. It wasn't about passion. It was about refuge. "You don't need to do this for me." "I know." He smiled faintly. But I want to. The process was quick. In less than 2 weeks, with the help of Eleanor's sister and a lawyer recommended by Ben, they arranged the paperwork. The date was set for an ordinary Tuesday. The civil registry office was small, far from the city center, with beige walls and a noisy fan. There were no flowers, no rings, no witnesses beyond the 2 required by law, a hospital receptionist and a morning shift nurse. Eleanor wore a simple blue blouse and trousers that were still loose from her weight loss. Ben wore his white uniform because he had a shift shortly after. When the official asked if both were there by free and spontaneous will, Eleanor took a deep breath before answering. Yes. And that was the only word she spoke that day. When she signed her name, now with his surname, she didn't feel magic, nor immediate relief, but she felt something she had never felt in the other marriage, a sense of belonging. It was strange, marrying for protection, and yet feeling she was allowing herself to exist in a new place. Outside the registry office, Ben simply took her hand, with the lightness of someone who understands boundaries. Are you okay? I don't know, but I think now I can try to be. They returned in silence. There was no celebration. He went to the hospital. She returned home with her sister. Later that same day, a notification arrived on Thomas's phone. A screenshot, a marriage certificate. He didn't react as Eleanor feared. He didn't call. He didn't show up. But his absence carried a new tension, like the silence before a storm. Eleanor knew the story with Thomas wasn't over. But now, at least, she was no longer alone. And more than that, for the first time, she was legally free to begin. Even if the beginning hurt, even if love didn't yet have a name, she didn't marry for love. But for the first time, someone had given her the love of a silent gesture, the opportunity to feel safe. A marriage of convenience, or the quiet dawn of something more? What do you think Thomas's next move will be? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the final chapter of this incredible journey. The quiet escape, a diagnosis that freed her. The week after the civil marriage, Eleanor woke up with a calm she didn't remember feeling before. It was as if the storm that pursued her was, at last, tired of blowing against her. She opened her eyes slowly, listening to the soft sound of the kettle in the kitchen. It was Saturday, and the aroma of apple cinnamon tea, her favorite, already filled the air. Ben was preparing breakfast with the lightness of someone in no hurry. They had only been living together for 3 days, a practical consequence of the newly signed certificate, and everything was still new. There were empty spaces in the house and silences that both respected, like one respects a pain that hasn't yet faded. But there were also gestures, small, precise, and full of meaning. He never asked what she wanted for the day. He just observed, and he was right. He put 2 slices of bread in the toaster before she felt hungry. He folded the sofa blanket without touching the pillow that still carried her scent. He brought her tea before she said her stomach hurt. And she began to notice that this, more than any declaration, was love. Not the love of soap operas, of shouting, of promises on the high seas, but everyday love, the love of hands that reach out to wash dishes when your body can't do anymore, the love of silence that comforts instead of demands, the love of presence that doesn't claim space, but only shares the same time. Eleanor, little by little, allowed herself to exist in that house. It was a simple flat, quickly rented by Ben when everything happened, but it had something no other house had: security. She began to leave her books on the shelf, her clothes in the closet, a glass jar with mint candies on the bedside table. She painted the kitchen wall a terracotta shade that reminded her of Edinburgh on cold mornings. It was little, But it was all she could give at that moment. And Ben never asked for more than that. One night, as she set the table for dinner, he put soft music on his phone, an old Irish folk song she hadn't heard since childhood. She paused with the plate in her hand, surprised. "How did you know?" she asked, her eyes moist. "I heard you humming it in the shower last week." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She just smiled. And that was enough. Their routine wasn't perfect. She still had anxiety attacks. She still sometimes woke up with nightmares. She still avoided certain hospital corridors for fear of crossing paths with someone from her past. But now there was someone by her side when she couldn't breathe. Someone who took her hand without saying, "It will pass," because it didn't always pass. But who said, with his gaze, "I am here." Ben was a man of gestures, not promises. And Eleanor learned to value that. He didn't say, "I love you," but she knew it. It was in the unsweetened tea when she needed to care for her liver, in the note left on the cushion with a poem by Seamus Heaney, in the gentle touch on her back when she paused in front of the window, lost in thought. One ordinary Sunday, she saw him asleep on the sofa, with a book open on his lap. She observed his features, his strong jawline, the beard that grew too fast, his long fingers marked by years of hospital work, and she thought, how can someone carry so much calm within themselves? She approached slowly, touched the tip of his fingers, as if testing reality. He opened his eyes. Half asleep. "Everything all right?" he murmured. She just nodded. Then she sat beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. They remained there for hours without saying a word. And in that silence, Eleanor understood what she had never understood with Thomas. True love doesn't fill voids. It waits for you to rebuild yourself in your own time. And then, it offers itself as a shelter, not as salvation. The following months were like a slow, steady autumn. The leaves didn't fall all at once, but one by one, she shed versions of herself that no longer fit. The Eleanor who apologized for existing, the one who begged for affection, the one who accepted crumbs as a feast. And instead of those women, another emerged, still with marks, but with roots. Ben changed nothing in her. He only watered what already existed. And she, for the first time, felt she deserved to flourish. 12 months later, winter bid farewell to Edinburgh, with a cold that no longer cut as sharply as before. It was a clear morning, with a cloudless sky and a gentle wind, as if even time knew that something new was breathing in that city. Eleanor Vance walked down the building stairs with firm steps, her coat buttoned to her neck, her bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes attentive to the world. She had a routine checkup. She no longer went to the hospital with fear. She went with memory. She walked through the corridors that once saw her fragile and now saw her whole. Employees greeted her by name, some even with knowing smiles, as if they had silently bet on her recovery. The doctor reviewed the tests, glanced at the file, and finally said, "You're stable. Strong. The markers are excellent. We don't need any more sessions. Now, you just have to live." She felt it. She didn't cry, didn't laugh. She just took a deep breath, as if keeping that sentence deep in her chest, where pain once resided. Leaving the office, she sent a message to Ben. "All good." He replied in less than 2 minutes. "I knew it. Soup's ready at home." Their life had molded into a precise simplicity. They shared routines like learning to dance slowly. He took night shifts twice a week. She started working in a ceramic workshop her sister had set up with a friend. She molded small pieces, almost always imperfect, but full of intention. They lived in a bigger apartment now, nothing luxurious. But there were plants in the corners, paintings chosen together, a sky-blue curtain in the living room, and a constant smell of warm bread in the mornings. Every corner of the house told a part of her reconstruction. Eleanor still had difficult days. There were still moments when she felt the shadow of who she was. Sometimes she woke up with Thomas's name in her throat, like a thorn that hadn't been completely spat out. But she was no longer a hostage to it. She knew what to do with the pain. She knew where to place the fear so it wouldn't take over her body. Thomas no longer had open paths. Living in a secluded house, surrounded by closed windows and high walls, he spent his days between bottles of cheap whiskey and unanswered calls. The office that once bustled with contracts was now a pile of expired papers. Friends had slowly drifted away, like dust carried by time. Even his mother, once his accomplice, no longer visited him. He walked through the rooms as if searching for something or someone, but it wasn't Eleanor. It was himself. The man who pretended not to see. The man who never loved, but demanded love. The man who never touched, but claimed presence. Now, there was no one to touch. No one to demand from. Once he tried to send a letter. It wasn't an apology. Thomas didn't know how to ask for forgiveness, but an attempt to remind her who he had been. The letter never arrived. Eleanor had changed her address and left no trace. A part of him felt relieved. The other part sank even deeper. And while he lost himself, Eleanor was reborn, with shorter hair and clearer eyes, as if pain also cleansed the soul from the inside out. She walked without fear, laughed loudly when she wanted to, left the balcony door open even in the cold wind. She no longer asked permission to exist. One evening, on the anniversary of the surgery that almost took her life, she prepared a simple dinner at home. Ben arrived from the hospital with cold hands and a bouquet of sunflowers, the only ones he found at the end of that winter. "Why sunflowers?" she asked, smiling. "Because they're like you. They know how to turn their face towards the light," he replied, kissing her forehead. They sat at the table. They ate slowly. Then she raised a glass of wine and said, "Sometimes I think I truly died. Not in that hospital. But before, when I stopped feeling, desiring, existing. And then I think, maybe I came back, not to live as before, but to live as never before." Ben gently clinked his glass against hers. "And living with you is all I want." She didn't respond. She just extended her hand, firm, and he held it, as always. Outside, winter silently departed. Inside, she was finally home. She didn't flee. She faced. And when she thought she was marrying out of fear, she discovered the safest love of all. A love built with patience, respect, and presence. A love that freed her, even from herself. Eleanor Vance didn't survive the pain. She walked through it. And in walking through it, she found not only freedom, she found a new way to love, without demands, without rush, without erasing herself. A love that didn't ask her to heal, only that she allow herself to breathe. That love didn't rebuild her, but it waited for her to do it for herself. And it stayed. It stayed when it hurt. It stayed when she pulled back. It stayed when everything was still in doubt. And it kept staying, until she understood. True love isn't about promising the world. It's about sitting by your side, while you rediscover yourself within it. And you? What would you do in her place? Tell me in the comments. I read everything with great care. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's possible to start over, and that a love exists that doesn't hurt. It only embraces. The next story is already on its way. I'll be waiting for you there.